The forbidden fruit. Dawn arrived on the Saborian plains like molten gold poured across endless orchards. The crisp morning air bit at Kalen's weathered face as he stepped onto his porch, boots sinking into dew-soaked grass. Steam rose from the mug cradled in his calloused hands as he surveyed the familiar patchwork of his farm stretching toward the horizon. Saboria had been wild once, untamed and hostile. But Kalen's ancestors had carved out a life here 3 generations ago, coaxing harvests from the red earth beneath alien stars. The apple trees they'd brought from Earth had adapted well, their fruit sweeter somehow in the strange soil. Yet something felt different this morning. As Kalen walked between the rows of his orchard, half lost in the peaceful routine, a shimmer caught his eye. Not sunlight, something else entirely. He knelt beside a cluster of roots where the grass lay flattened in an odd spiral pattern. There, nestled in the shadows, was a fruit unlike any he'd ever seen. It resembled an apple but gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, its surface shifting from gold to indigo to crimson as the light touched it. Every farmer on the frontier knew the stories. Forbidden fruits, they called them, remnants of ancient civilizations that sometimes surfaced on quiet worlds like his. Dangerous things that carried echoes of galactic conflicts lost to time. Kalen's fingers trembled as he reached for it. The fruit felt warm, almost alive, and its scent was intoxicating, sweet and sharp, flooding his senses with something that seemed to whisper of distant stars. A soft growl made him freeze. At the orchard's edge stood Tyroth, watching with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. The Lithian wolf was massive, easily the size of a bear, his fur shimmering with hints of blue and violet. He'd appeared on Kalen's land 3 months ago, limping and half-starved, the last of his kind, or so the stories went. They'd maintained a careful distance since then, man and beast acknowledging each other but never crossing that invisible boundary. Until now. Tyroth's gaze was fixed not on Kalen, but on the forbidden fruit. There was something in those ancient eyes, a hunger deeper than starvation, as if the fruit called to something in his very blood. Against every rational thought, Kalen found himself extending his hand, offering the shimmering fruit to the wolf. Tyroth approached slowly, every muscle taut, nostrils flaring. Their eyes met for one fragile moment of trust before the wolf gently took the fruit in his powerful jaws. The sound of flesh breaking seemed oddly musical in the still morning air. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Tyroth's pupils dilated until they swallowed the world, and the wolf staggered backward, his body beginning to convulse as strange light flickered beneath his fur. Kalen watched in terror as the forbidden fruit rolled away, half-eaten, its luminous skin now dull and bruised. Above them, clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. He whispered Tyroth's name, knowing in his bones that this single act of kindness had just changed everything. Visions of the cosmos. Time seemed to stretch and twist around them as Tyroth writhed on the ground, his breathing shallow and desperate. Kalen knelt beside the suffering wolf, torn between terror and a farmer's instinct to help, but there was no wound to bandage, no fever to break, only the silent storm raging behind Tyroth's now glowing eyes. When the wolf's eyes finally opened again, they no longer belonged to him alone. Cosmic fire swirled in their depths, galaxies and starfields spinning in defiance of all logic. An iridescent mist began to rise from Tyroth's body, curling in the cold air with a will of its own. The orchard transformed around them. Light and shadow danced across the apple trees as visions flickered to life, playing out scenes snatched from the flow of time itself. Kalen saw planets burning, their surfaces scarred by weapons that turned stone to glass. Imperial fleets blotted out alien suns, their triangular ships spreading like a plague across the galaxy. Civilizations fell beneath the Empire's iron grip, some fighting to their last breath, others surrendering in hope of mercy that never came. But there was hope too. In the ashes of conquered worlds, rebellion stirred. Banners rose where once there had been only fear, and species that had never known each other joined hands against their common oppressor. At the center of it all stood Tyroth himself, but not as he was now. This was Tyroth's legend, a luminous wolf whose howl carried across star systems, whose call awakened courage in the hearts of the downtrodden. The visions shifted, becoming more personal. Kalen saw himself, older and weathered, standing before crowds of beings from a dozen different worlds. He felt Tyroth's overwhelming sense of destiny, the dizzying realization that he was meant for something far greater than the quiet life he'd known. Then came the final vision, sharp and urgent, a great hall of glass and steel where the Imperial Council sat in session. Their faces were twisted with fury as they spoke a single name in 1,000 different languages, each pronunciation carrying the weight of prophecy. Tyroth. The vision snapped away like a cut thread. Tyroth collapsed, exhausted and trembling, while Kalen reached out with a shaking hand to touch the wolf's massive shoulder. For the first time, Tyroth didn't flinch away. The world rushed back in around them, wind carrying the scent of ozone and the distant roar of engines. Kalen looked up to see triangular shadows drifting across the sky. Imperial ships, drawn by the psychic flare of forbidden power, their searchlights cutting through the clouds to fall upon his peaceful home. Tyroth raised his head, meeting Kalen's gaze with eyes that still held the lingering glow of stars. In that moment, an unspoken pact was sealed between them. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The future of the galaxy had shifted on a quiet morning in the Saborian plains, in an orchard where a human and a wolf had shared something forbidden. The Empire arrives. The next morning brought a silence that screamed. The usual chorus of insects and birds had fallen mute, as if nature itself sensed that something unnatural had taken place. Kalen stood on his porch, shotgun in hand, though he knew it would be useless against what was coming. Above, scorched clouds stretched across the Saborian sky, evidence not of storm, but of steel. They descended like black spears, 3 sleek obsidian dropships that made the orchard trees bend and wail beneath the fury of their thrusters. Fruit was torn from branches, dust swirled into choking clouds, and the peaceful morning shattered under the weight of imperial authority. The ships hissed open with hydraulic precision, disgorging enforcers clad in armor that seemed to swallow light. At their head strode Commander Velis, her silver cybernetic eye scanning Kalen's property with methodical coldness, as if everything before her was part of an equation she'd already solved. By order of the Galactic Authority, she declared, her voice cutting through the settling dust, you are in possession of an entity affected by a Class 9 precursor artifact. You are under immediate investigation for dissemination of unauthorized temporal knowledge and the awakening of a Class X anomaly. Kalen's fingers tightened around his shotgun, but he didn't raise it. Behind him, in the barn, Tyroth lay curled in the hay, still recovering from the visions that had torn through his mind. The wolf's eyes no longer burned with cosmic fire, but his body trembled in restless sleep. I don't know what you're talking about, Kalen replied flatly. Velis's cybernetic eye flared once, scanning his vitals. Lie detected. She gestured, and 2 of her soldiers moved forward, their weapons humming to life as they advanced toward the barn. Do not interfere, she warned as Kalen tensed. But before the soldiers could reach the barn doors, Tyroth's growl rolled across the farmyard like thunder. It reverberated through the ground, setting every living thing to absolute stillness. Then the barn doors exploded outward as the Lithian wolf emerged, larger than life, his fur crackling with residual energy. His eyes no longer held visions of the future, but they burned with pure, primal fury. The enforcers raised their rifles, but Tyroth was already moving, a blur of teeth and cosmic muscle. The first soldier was launched 20 feet before he could fire. The second disappeared beneath a whirlwind of claws and fangs. Fall back. Velis commanded, her own weapon drawn. Contain the anomaly. But Tyroth wasn't fighting like an animal. He moved with intelligence, with purpose, striking at weak points in their formation, using their own tactics against them. The forbidden fruit hadn't just given him visions, it had awakened something deeper, older, more dangerous. As energy bolts seared the air around him, Tyroth's howl rose above the chaos. It wasn't the sound of a wolf, but something far more profound, a call that seemed to reach beyond the planet's atmosphere, beyond the system itself. Kalen watched in awe as his quiet farm became a battleground, knowing that this was only the beginning. The Empire had come for Tyroth, but they had no idea what they were truly facing. The last of the Lithian wolves had remembered who he was meant to be. The gathering storm. The battle raged for what felt like hours but lasted only minutes. When the dust settled, half of Velus's squad lay scattered across the farmyard, their advanced armor no match for Tyroth's primal fury. The commander herself retreated to her dropship, her cybernetic eye recording every detail of the wolf's impossible abilities. "This is Commander Velus to Imperial Command," she spoke into her comm unit, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. "The anomaly is beyond containment protocols. Requesting immediate reinforcement and orbital bombardment authorization." But as she spoke, something extraordinary began to happen across the galaxy. Tyroth's howl, that sound that had transcended the physical realm, was being heard on distant worlds. In the slave camps of Kepler 9, prisoners looked up from their labor with tears in their eyes. On the mining colonies of the Vega system, workers dropped their tools as hope stirred in their hearts for the first time in decades. The call of the last Lithian wolf had become a signal, a beacon that spoke directly to the oppressed: "You are not forgotten. You are not alone." Kalen helped Tyroth retreat to the hills behind his farm as more Imperial ships appeared on the horizon. The wolf was wounded but unbroken, his golden eyes now holding depths of wisdom that seemed ancient beyond measure. "They'll keep coming," Kalen said, checking the crude bandage he'd wrapped around a plasma burn on Tyroth's flank. "The whole Empire will come for you now." Tyroth's response wasn't words but understanding that flowed directly into Kalen's mind, a gift from the forbidden fruit that had bonded them beyond speech. The wolf showed him visions of what was already beginning. On 100 worlds, the downtrodden were rising. Some were human, others were species Kalen had never imagined, but all had heard the call. The Galactic Empire, which had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, suddenly found itself facing something it had never encountered, a unified resistance with nothing left to lose. As they sheltered in a cave overlooking the Saborian plains, Kalen watched Imperial dropships land around his burning farmhouse. Commander Velus was setting up a command post, clearly planning to use his home as bait. "We can't run forever," he murmured. Tyroth's mental voice was calm, certain: "We won't need to." On the horizon, new lights were appearing, not the harsh glare of Imperial ships, but the gentler glow of civilian transports. They came from all directions: farmers like Kalen, traders, refugees, anyone who had suffered under Imperial rule and heard the wolf's call to action. The rebellion wasn't coming. It was already here. As Kalen watched his quiet world transform into the first battleground of a galactic revolution, he understood that the forbidden fruit had done more than grant visions. It had awakened a legend, given form to hope itself, and turned a simple farmer and a lonely wolf into the catalysts for change the galaxy had been waiting for. The Empire's reign of terror was about to meet its greatest challenge, not from armies or fleets, but from the unbreakable bond between those who refused to surrender their freedom. The dawn of liberation. The final battle for Saboria began at dawn, 3 days after Tyroth's awakening. The skies above Kalen's farm were crowded with ships, Imperial destroyers facing off against a ragtag fleet of converted freighters, mining vessels, and anything else the growing rebellion could muster. But this wasn't a battle that would be won by superior firepower. Commander Velus had made a critical error in using Kalen's farm as her base. She had underestimated the power of symbols, the importance of the place where the legendary wolf had first awakened. As rebel forces converged on the Saborian plains, Tyroth stood atop the hill overlooking his former sanctuary, no longer just a wolf but something transcendent. Kalen stood beside him, no longer just a farmer but the first human to answer the wolf's call. Around them gathered beings from across the galaxy, former slaves, disbanded military units that had turned against the Empire, traders whose worlds had been strip-mined, families whose children had been conscripted and never returned. They were vastly outnumbered. The Imperial forces had better weapons, better training, better ships. But they lacked the one thing that mattered most: they fought for control, while the rebels fought for freedom. When Tyroth howled one final time, the sound didn't just carry across Saboria, it echoed through hyperspace itself, reaching every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. On 1,000 worlds, the remaining Imperial garrisons found themselves facing uprisings they couldn't contain. The Battle of Saboria lasted only 6 hours. It ended not with the rebels' victory, but with something unprecedented in Imperial history: mass defection. Entire Imperial units, hearing Tyroth's call and seeing the determination of those who followed him, laid down their weapons and joined the rebellion. Commander Velis was among the last to surrender, her cybernetic eye recording the moment when a simple farmer helped her to her feet after her ship had been shot down. "Why?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "You could have left me to die." Kalen's answer was simple: "Because that's not who we are." In the months that followed, the Galactic Empire crumbled not through conquest but through conversion. The forbidden fruit's gift wasn't just visions of possible futures, it was the power to show others their better selves, their capacity for hope and change. Tyroth traveled from world to world, his presence alone enough to inspire former enemies to become allies. Kalen accompanied him, no longer a farmer but an ambassador of peace, helping to build the new Galactic Confederation that rose from the Empire's ashes. Years later, as Kalen stood once again in his rebuilt orchard, now a shrine visited by pilgrims from across the galaxy, he often reflected on that morning when he'd found a strange fruit and made a choice that changed everything. Tyroth, graying now but still magnificent, would lie beneath the apple trees where their journey began. Sometimes youngsters would ask how it all started, how two unlikely friends had sparked a revolution that transformed the galaxy. Kalen would smile and tell them the truth: it began with kindness. With trust. With the simple decision to share something precious with someone who needed it, even when it seemed dangerous to do so. The forbidden fruit was gone, its power spent in that first transcendent moment. But its lesson remained, that even the smallest act of compassion, shared between strangers, could grow into something that changed the fate of worlds. As the twin suns set over the Saborian plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kalen sat beside his old friend and watched ships from 100 worlds come and go in peace. The galaxy they had helped create wasn't perfect, but it was free. And sometimes, that made all the difference. The end.